Welcome to week 5 of the course. So last week we talked all about conducting reflective cycles of inquiry into classroom practice. And this week we're going to focus on a key element of that cycle, which is analyzing talk through systematic observation and coding. We're going to discuss what we mean by coding, why we use coding, how we code, as well as how to ensure that we're being ethical when we're conducting reflective inquiries. There are a lot of videos that are relevant to this content from the edudialogue.org website. So instead of replicating any of that, what I've done is I've just put those videos below this one for you to watch in turn. I've also included a couple of those videos as well in the read section, by the way, so do make sure to take a look. So your objective this week is to add more information to your facilitation plan regarding supporting your colleagues in capturing the right data for their research questions, as well as how you will support them in interpreting and in digesting their findings. You can also continue to gather resources that you think are highly applicable to your setting to help your colleagues decide on appropriate ways of identifying dialogue in their practice. So for example, this can include which specific tools or coding templates that you'll bring to your colleagues. So how can we identify key dialogic features in our setting? Going back to this table that you'll be very familiar with by now, which introduces the categories of dialogue, we can actually also use this as a coding scheme for systematic coding of dialogue in the classroom. And what a coding scheme is it aims to break down individual contributions and considers the functions that those serve. So we use a coding scheme by systematically categorizing each interaction or talk in a setting, chunk by chunk, often coding each speaker's turn individually or separately. So for every speaker's turn, we would listen to what they say, and then we would categorize it under one of the dialogue categories that you see. If we heard a teacher say, "Can you explain your answer further?" for example, we would code that as inviting reasoning. You can code live, although that is quite challenging, as you will no doubt see in the activities section. There's a coding webinar and it brings you through live coding exercises. And so you'll see that there, where it can be quite difficult to do it in a live environment. But you can also, if it's too challenging, code by recording the classroom talk by video or audio, and then coding the transcripts of those afterwards. There are both benefits and limitations to coding, which are worth noting. The benefits of coding include being able to identify patterns across lessons or episodes that you might not be able to see in a fast-paced classroom, and it can also compare student groups using a consistent measure. Limitations would include categories not being straightforward to apply, and coding does treat spoken turns separately and out of context, and it ignores how codes work in combination and how one person's communication might influence another's. It also gives us limited information about the dialogic ethos in a setting, such as how confident the learners are in participating freely and whether or not there's mutual trust and respect. Tips for mitigating these limitations include using complementary methods to strengthen the approach. For example, we can rate the student participation level across a whole lesson using a simple rating scale, and I've included one of those in the downloadable resources. We can also explore how a dialogue progresses over time during or across lessons through reading it carefully and through interpreting the interactions in light of the coding pattern that is emerging. Then we can write a narrative about these, taking account of different factors such as how participants stimulate further contributions by others and significant features of the context, including pedagogical objectives and strategies. So I've included videos 10 and 11 from the edudialogue.org site as resources in the read section. Video 10 would reintroduce the categories that you've already seen, and video 11 importantly introduces the remainder of the code. So you should watch those to familiarize or refamiliarize yourselves with all of the categories of dialogue from our coding scheme. The important takeaway here in terms of how to use this coding scheme to support your colleagues is to really emphasize to them to only focus on 1 or 2 codes per reflective cycle. There's always time and space for them to do more codes in other cycles to come. but it gets a bit overwhelming if they decide to focus on more than 2. It's also helpful, I would say, for them to have those codes in mind before beginning their inquiries, because that will really help your colleagues know what to listen out for and help direct the reflective cycle. So once your colleagues have decided on the categories of codes that they will focus on in their inquiries, they're going to need to think about how they'll carry out their inquiry, who they'll focus on, how they'll actually record the dialogue that's taking place, for example. And for this, I've included 2 videos below this one instead of repeating any of that information here. The first is video 12 from the edudialogue.org site, and that looks at different ways you can carry out coding in your classroom. And the second is video 13 from the same site, and that looks at how to identify and code categories of dialogue. So please do watch those 2 videos after this one. Once you've decided on the codes that you'll use for your inquiries, or your colleagues will use for their inquiries, as well as the way that they'll collect the data, like using an audio recording, for example, they're going to need to consider collecting baseline data, and that can be something that you run through with them. And what baseline data means is gathering information from your setting before any changes are made. And it can be a good idea to collect baseline data in order to give your colleagues more information about their assumptions, since students might be better or worse than they think. It can help them understand changes over time. They can compare their baseline data with data that they gather later to see if anything changes. And it can also give your colleagues an indication if any interventions that they're putting in place are making a positive difference. And by the way, this is also included in the TSETA pack in the materials that I've included in the read section below. The next segment that I'm going to do now is on research ethics, and this is really important to include, and it will be equally as important for you to talk about and reflect on with your colleagues. I have similarly included another video that reviews the bulk of information that you'll need to know below, and so that's the third one that you'll see below this video, and so please do take a look at that. But as a very quick overview, as in any professional activity, there are some general ethical considerations for using TSETA to investigate dialogue in your and your colleagues' environment. Educational researchers in Britain are expected to abide by ethical guidelines issued by the British Educational Research Association, which I have linked to in the read section of the weekly materials below. If you are from a different country, I know that we have a lot of people from all over the world participating in this course. Please do check the associated guidelines for you. And it might be a good idea to post these guidelines in the discussion forum as well, in case another learner from your country hasn't yet come across them. So the principles of research ethics, which I've included on what you'll see here now, are to minimize the risk of harm and maximize the benefits. By risk of harm, we mean physical harm or discomfort to participants, whether they're students or staff, psychological distress, social disadvantage, and lack of privacy or anonymity. To obtain informed consent, to protect anonymity and confidentiality, to avoid deceptive practices, and provide the right to withdraw. So that's it from me for this week. Thank you so much for your time and your patience. As I said before, please do watch those 3 videos underneath this one once you're finished here. And of course, take a look at the read, the do, and the discuss sections for this week. And I will see you in Module 6.